want to tell you about Katie. Katie was one of my real good friends back in Atlanta. She was a young lady I met in my parish back there. And Katie, from the time she was a little kid, for most of her life, when she wasn't sleeping or in a hospital bed, was in a wheelchair for her whole life. And I met Katie because I was working as a teen minister with her older brother, and he introduced me to her one day as we were beginning to prepare for confirmation. And I went over and I said, "Hi, Katie." And she strained and she leaned forward as much as she could in her wheelchair, and she put her arms out and she pulled me down and she said, "I'm a hugger, get used to it." And every time I would go to see Katie or I would meet her somewhere at church or on the street, I had to give her a hug, and she wanted to give me a hug. And if I forgot, she'd do that again. She'd strain and reach forward and pull me down and hug me. It was remarkable. Even when she was in the hospital and I would go to see her, she was always concerned about how I was feeling, whether I was well. She knew that I had had something called cancer and that I had gone through chemotherapy. And I didn't have the beautiful head of hair that I have now. Before it got to be this color, it was red. But I was bald, and Katie made a point every time she would see me at church of making sure I had a hat on if I went outside in the sun, and she would want to rub my head. Look. It was amazing. I like to call her Saint Katie, because Katie went back to be with God. She went back to be with God about a month after I left Atlanta. And the other reason I call her Saint Katie is she had a direct line to God. Anybody know what a speed dial is? You know, you hit one button and you get the person you're trying to call. She had God on speed dial. It was amazing. So if I needed prayers, I'd go to Katie. But Katie sometimes felt a little outside. Not everybody was kind to her. Not everybody would spend time with her. She was kind of on the outside looking in. But she made it a point to hug and say hello to everybody she came in contact with, even if they wouldn't return that favor. Isn't that pretty amazing? So really, what I want you to do as you go through this week is think about Katie, pray for her, okay, and pray to her, and just pray to be like her, that you'll always be the people of love and kindness. Can I ask you to do that? Okay, fist bumps. Okay? All right, thanks. Let's go on back. I tell that story because it's so very easy to overlook how transformative physical contact with another human being can be. All too often, we just let those moments pass by unnoticed. A simple handshake or a pat on the back, and even those fist bumps I like to get from my friends. But those brief moments can be meaningful and profound. They often accompany the most significant moments in our lives. Think about the first time you embraced the love of your life and shared that first kiss. Think about the first and every time you held your children. Remember how you felt when you held your spouse's hand to exchange vows, or you reached out to embrace a loved one to say your final earthly farewells. Those moments of touch, whether filled with sorrow or joy, are moments of divine grace that operate in us and on us. Hopefully they build us up and remain with us, making us better, more human. But not all moments of physical contact are times of sweetness and grace. Some are hurtful, demeaning, threatening. They intimidate and even harm us, leaving us shattered and broken, physically and emotionally. We can see that dark side in the images of the peaceful protesters being beaten in Selma, Alabama. It's there in that photo of a young girl cradling a dead classmate at Kent State. It's in every image of the Holocaust. What can't be denied is that physical contact with another of God's children can change us, for better or worse. The touch of another person, or even the possibility of contact with people who are different, can cause us to separate ourselves, to isolate and ostracize others, like the lepers in ancient Israel. For centuries, lepers were isolated from the greater community, even in Christian countries. We know that St. Damien of Molokai spent much of his adult life ministering to isolated and outcast lepers on that island in Hawaii at the end of the 19th century. And while today, due to advances in science and medicine, we understand that leprosy, or Hansen's disease, is highly treatable and not highly contagious, but isolation is still imposed in certain countries despite the widespread availability of free medicines throughout the world. In Jesus' time, lepers were kept outside the community, and the devout Jews would avoid all contact with them. They were not just thought to be ill. They were deemed impure, and any person coming in contact with them would also be deemed ritually impure and subject to similar treatment. Their existence was bleak. So bleak that image of their isolation and segregation even made its way into the classic movie Ben-Hur, with the scene of the lepers relegated to the caves outside Jerusalem, near the pits used to burn trash, with food being lowered to them from the cliffs above. Even then, just like today, people of faith isolated God's children, physically, socially, and spiritually. The cleansing miracle we hear in today's gospel appears in all but the Gospel of John. It's powerful, not because of what happens, but because of how it happens. Certainly, Jesus could have just told the leper he was cured and sent him on his way. The cure would certainly have occurred. But Jesus challenged the traditional religious thinking of the time. He went out of his way to physically touch the leper, understanding that he would be challenged and attacked by the teachers of the law. He chooses to break down the barriers to community, signaling that the requirement to show love and mercy, understanding and compassion is more important than empty ritual observances. For many of the Jewish ruling religious class of the time, Jesus' actions were scandalous, turning centuries of Mosaic law on its head. But for Jesus, the leper's faith in his love and mercy compelled his cure. It was more important than strict adherence to religious convention, especially those that do not lead to lives lived in charity and mercy. It's a point Jesus makes often. Think about his encounter with the woman caught in adultery. Think about his healing of the centurion's servant and his healing of the man with the withered hand on the Sabbath. As St. James says, faith without works is dead. As Catholic Christians, we must be people of faith and hope, living lives of charity. If we're honest with ourselves, we recognize that there are outcasts among us today, although we call them by many different names. They come from different races, religions, and countries. Maybe they speak a different language or have different beliefs and values. But like us and with us, they share a common fellowship as God's children, created and loved by Him. I wish I had read today's office as I was preparing this homily, but as I prayed it this morning, one of the antiphons in the Office of Readings jumped out at me. It's that great quote from the book of Genesis. God looked upon all he had made and saw that it was very good. Nourished by Christ's body and blood, we're sent forth from this and every Mass to be Christ-like, to be Christ in the world. If our rituals and liturgical celebrations don't lead us to reach out and touch the lives of our brothers and sisters shut out and isolated by society or by our own hearts and minds, if we do not love them as Christ loves them, then our liturgies become for us an empty ritual obligation, not the act of love that they are meant to be. As we finish our prayer this evening, let's pray for God's strength and grace to be Christ-like people of courage, touching whoever today's lepers are, in our prayer, in our attitudes, and in our actions. As you'll hear in just a few moments, glorifying Christ with our lives.